Oh, yay! I'm so happy.
So am I. I felt so badly this year because I asked you to learn on Thursday and then one meeting after another. So I saw that photo of your little boy
with the huge chocolate bunny.
I'm like, holy.
Yeah, I was doing the math, right? So like 100 grams is one of those big bars, right? Which is a lot for an adult to eat in a day, right? So I was thinking for his body weight, maybe 30 grams would be like kind of upper limit chocolate in a day.
Especially with ADHD.
Yeah.
Depending,
with
my
him,
kids have been always calm.
yeah, with him, he kind of gets focused, which is nice. So infinite MoCSSy, infinite or max. Yeah. Wonderful. Great, great, great. Great. And we are waiting for one person to join us online. So, okay. Oh yeah.
In return for getting access, I figured I would do budget. We're going to have a budget model. They had something to show government credits. These are the short-term goals of certain models. And that's extra tasking for graduates. Well, yeah, if you leave before 90 days, I go the wrong way. No.
It's kind of two very different things.
Well, because they when you're creating programs, and when you're there are so many different outcomes. The government looks like future. Where's my reports, or to report again.
That might not tell you very much.
No, it doesn't tell you anything about success, right? And that's the all that losing gang members. I have that policy there, but because when you think of a gang membership, here's a 300-question survey, and if you would just fill it out properly. So I did the open-ended interview, and trying to find something that when you have too many have a lot of drive here, right? It's a huge data set. It's huge. The information I got is so valuable. It's lovely, but it was there. I think that was.
That's like.
Well, it's not
8 months of transcription or something?
Yeah, well, it's multiple of 6 because I'm fast, but then I have to re-listen once I transcribe. So I run at 50%. See, the average is 2 hours from 1 to 6. Then average 4 hours of transcribing for 2 hours and then 2 hours to correction. Oh, and then I have to because they get names. So this
Wow.
So yeah, and I look back at it. So
Right.
Like,
Right.
and then I have a life.
Okay, go ahead. Yep, Jen. And who? How will, is it, can I see on here? Is it possible? No? Okay. Yeah, it would be nice to invite them because it would be really nice to have their input.
You know,
Boger. Jennifer Boger. B-O-G-E-R. So do they have a view of the room at all? Or is it just the PowerPoint? Okay. Okay. No, it's probably okay if they can hear me. That's fine, I think. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I know most of you, but for anyone who I don't know, my name is Piper Jackson. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at ERMAX, and I work on the MoCSSy program, and which is the Modeling of Complex Social Systems program. And today we're going to talk about transdisciplinarity, which is one mode of cross-disciplinary collaboration. And I'm going to kind of lay down the groundwork for several different types of cross-disciplinary collaboration, just so that it makes sense, right? And so we can see what is appropriate when. I'm also going to talk about some themes that came up in a series of interviews with people who do cross-disciplinary work. These were all aging-related technology projects. And then finally, if we have enough time, I'm going to bring up some things that I think might be possible solutions from my experience in software development. And then hopefully we'll have some time to discuss other ideas. Okay? So I hope that sounds good. So the transdisciplinary collaboration for developing solutions. So first of all, this is the background. So I use the term cross-disciplinarity to talk about different kinds of collaboration. You probably have heard of a lot of different terms. Sometimes people call this integrated research, and there are other types of collaboration, and but this is, I think, the most general. So often our image of academics is that we are hermits, right? In our little shells, working by ourselves. And I think there was a point at which that was true, for the most part. But it isn't really the most common way of working anymore. We have situations that are a lot more like this, right? We have a bunch of different people working on different aspects of the same problem, and you know, different obstacles and challenges and frustrations, and also different positive things, successes are happening. And so I think we have to change our mode of collaboration to match that. So here's a little bit more of a rigorous, it's still pretty general, but a little bit more rigorous than the photos I just showed. So in the 20th century, we saw great advances in basic science, and I'm not just talking about the physical sciences. I think that we saw, you know, the foundations in the development of fields like psychology and sociology, and of course, most fields go back before the 20th century, but the 20th century was a time of really massive advancement in the general theories about how the world and how people behave. And but what we see nowadays is a great need for advances in applied science, because we face these giant problems, right? And these really difficult problems that are large in scale, complex in nature. They need immediate attention. They are volatile in the sense that they change, right? Things might be fine one day and terrible the next. They are uncertain in the sense that there are aspects that we cannot easily either sense or predict, and they are multidimensional. Right? There are multiple aspects that we have to consider. And so, so like the best example I think of this kind of giant problem is of course climate change, because and then I mean it has all of these characteristics, right? I mean it's of immediate importance, but for example, one of the aspects that has become very difficult is that there's a political and economic aspect of climate change, and that makes dealing with the issues much more complicated, right? So just as an example, one problem along these lines. Okay. So with cross-disciplinary collaboration, it really is about bringing different sets of expertise and resources together. And these are the different sectors that you are often bringing together, right? We have the researchers in academic research. We also have government, industry, and other community members who are involved. But it's also important to remember that there's this kind of larger perspective, right? That if we're dealing with community stakeholders, for example, often we'll think of if we're developing technology, that users are community representatives, but sometimes it's the caregivers of those users, or maybe the funding organization of those users, or the relatives of the users. And it's the same with government and industry. You can be working with multiple levels and multiple people in each of these sectors. That's something to keep in mind. Okay. And so how do we work together? Well, we bring these different stakeholders together, and they have different kinds of expertise and knowledge. They're across organizations, and they're across the world, right, in different countries, and often speaking multiple languages. Now, often the automatic assumption is that we should use something that's like a traditional enterprise, right? That has a clear management that controls everything else, and then there are separate subsections that are each responsible for one kind of responsibility, right? We have research and development, production, marketing, and finance, and those don't interact with each other. They just interact with management, and management lets each of them know what to do. This does not really work well with research or innovation projects for the most part, because first of all, the kind of the relationships between the different groups and people involved is less hierarchical. We need more feedback between different people involved. We can't have a single control point. The process is intentionally unpredictable, and I'll talk about that some more later on. And the motivation varies, right? Why the different people who are involved in such a project are involved with it varies a lot. It's not a single organization with a single, for example, career advancement ladder or salary scale. Okay. So how do we work together? Well, these are the kinds of cross-disciplinary or cross-disciplinary collaboration that I'm going to talk about right now. Okay, and you probably have heard these terms or some of them before. Multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity. And people often use them interchangeably, but they do signify, in the literature about this kind of collaboration, they do signify quite different modes of interaction. Okay. So the first is multidisciplinarity. So we have different disciplines interacting, but not very much. Okay, so this is a lot like a factory model, and this is not actually that different from the traditional enterprise organization model that I showed you before, except this is not necessarily hierarchical. So you might have the different groups speaking together to each other directly, but the responsibilities are clear. You can make a plan, and you don't really need to change your plans and act dynamically. Okay, so the nice thing about multidisciplinarity is that you do have shared communication, but this is this kind of interaction and collaboration is kind of better for problems that aren't that difficult, okay, or problems that are perhaps actually solved. So we need different sets of expertise to solve the problem, but we know how to do that. So we don't really need to worry too much about changing our plans or reacting as we go along. Not breaking. Interdisciplinarity is when you have multiple disciplines, and there is kind of a clear disciplinary interaction. So these are for much more complex problems that have multiple aspects, where you definitely do need different sets of expertise, and it might not be clear at first how to apply that expertise. So you are going to have to talk to each other, okay, and understand each other. So here at SFU, we've done a lot of computational criminology projects, and that has involved the computer scientists having to learn at least some of the main concepts in criminology so that they know what to do. And it's also helpful for the criminologists to understand the general ideas of the kind of computational models that we build so that they have a good understanding of what we can build, what to expect from the model, okay, and what to ask for. So this is kind of an example of an interdisciplinary research collaboration. Okay? So building up that, I have written down there, common understanding as an obstacle. Okay, so this is the main thing that you have to overcome. People working on interdisciplinary projects generally, due to the nature of research, have a very deep body of understanding in a specific area of specialization. Right? That's why they're there, because they know a lot about one thing. Right? That's generally, with very few exceptions, that's generally what we're like in academia. And so, but for some problems, we do have to, augment that understanding. And so this is really where interdisciplinary is a good mode. Okay, so it's a collaborative communication exercise. Okay, finally, I'm going to talk about transdisciplinarity, which is something that people know less about. It's a little bit newer. But it's not that new. As you'll see, this is kind of a historical background. In 1994, there was this Charter of Transdisciplinarity by Niculescu, and honestly, some parts of it are a little hokey, but there are also great things in there. Okay, and I think perhaps I'm being too critical for something that was written at the very beginning of the idea of what transdisciplinarity was, right? So they were really breaking new ground. Okay. But the general idea that they stated as the need for transdisciplinarity is that we have problems for which we need a holistic view, right? Where we want to understand every aspect of that problem because it's complex, right? It involves physical, social, biological, political, economic dimensions. But it's impossible really to ever automatically have that holistic view. And probably it is impossible generally to have an absolute holistic view, right? So what we need to do is be able to dynamically integrate sets of disciplinary expertise, right? This is the best thing we can do. And we can get close to a perfect view, right? If we bring together experts from relevant fields, we can get a very good view. But because the problem, the source of our problems is always changing, we can't just decide upon one set of people to work together, right? We have to be able to do it dynamically. And that's going to mean that we're building up new bodies of information, new bodies of knowledge almost every time we do this. Okay? And this is something I really like from the charter, is that these are the kind of the principles that they underline: rigor, opening, and tolerance. Okay, so you want to kind of balance balance that scientific rigor that each of our fields, and or each of our sectors even, not just academic fields, but each of our sectors has an idea of rigor. But we also want to be open and tolerant of other perspectives, right? Open to other methods and tolerant of other perspectives. This is predated by an idea called post-normal science by Kontovitz and Ravitz, 1991. This is not exactly transdisciplinarity, but it's a body of theory that I think kind of tries to look at. It comes out of environmental science. And the idea of post-normal science is that, well, previously in philosophy of science, there's an idea that science goes through revolutionary and normal phases, right? And when a science becomes well developed, when it's new, it's revolutionary, and when it's well understood and useful as a tool, we say it's normal. So Newtonian physics is definitely in there. But the idea of post-normal science is that we have come to this point where normalization can happen, at least in some cases, right? That the rate of change has outpaced ability of science. In other words, we keep on having to develop our science to keep up with we have complex problems that cannot be ignored. And academic perspectives, this is another academic perspectives are not sufficient. We need to bring in stakeholders from the community or from the geographical area that we're dealing with, bring in policy makers and business representatives. Try to. Okay, so that's kind of a background of the motivation of why we need transdisciplinarity. And this is what it looks like. Okay, so transdisciplinarity is problem focused, right? So you build up your collaboration and your theory based on a specific problem. These problems are, as I mentioned before, are complex, multi-dimensional. The methods are evolving as we learn, how to integrate complex ideas, and as we improve, and as we adjust to the current situation. The boundaries between disciplines and between sectors is less clear. Transdisciplinary requires intense collaboration, right? And it's important to underline, this is not free. That there is that similar need for good communication that you see in interdisciplinary research, but at an even higher scale. And it's important to adjust for that. But this is kind of the really nice thing about transdisciplinary work, is that it's about expanding and sharing. Okay? And again, for somebody who is trying to plan a project from a traditional perspective, this might seem like a lot of extra. Okay? That, yeah, sure. Yeah. Yes, hello, Piper, testing the mic. That help? Okay. Yeah. Okay, hi, this is Piper, testing the mic. Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay, so the expanding and sharing knowledge. So fundamentally, in a transdisciplinary project, you are building information to understand a new discipline, right? This is you are, the knowledge that you develop as part of solving that problem becomes the foundation for later work dealing with that area and similar areas. And so this does require work to, first of all, build that new knowledge and to transfer it into some form that is usable. But I like to think of this as some kind of value added from a transdisciplinary project. That in fact, this is what makes transdisciplinary work even more valuable. So I think that's another important aspect to include when planning a transdisciplinary project. So there's some examples on the bottom. I'm not going to talk about them here. Action learning, appreciative inquiry, transactionalism. But you can look them up if you're interested. So here's a quick summary of the 3 different types. Okay, so with multidisciplinary research, we have multiple disciplines, and the kind of representative verbs of what people are doing are they're contributing and they're constructing the buildings, okay, to deal with the problem or to find something. In interdisciplinary research, you also have multiple disciplines, and the verbs are they're interacting and understanding each other. And in transdisciplinary research, you not only have multiple disciplines, but you have multiple sectors and different kinds of stakeholders involved. Okay? And the verbs are explore, right? Exploring new areas and establishing new methods and understanding and theory, and etc. All right, so that's kind of that was a summary of transdisciplinary and related forms of collaboration. So if you ever want to, just let me know. Okay. Okay. Good.
Yeah, no, this is.
I've heard that from a lot of people that they can kind of see this in their own experiences.
Absolutely.
Right. And I mean, it's still this is really even though the kind of the groundwork for transdisciplinary work is more than 20 years old. It's really just kind of starting to pick up.
Well, and it's indicative of what I'm doing at business class, where government's involved, and the treatment program itself is involved,
right,
and researchers are involved in multiple different ways because it doesn't have one.
Right.
And it's dealing with complex problems that I can't solve them all the time.
No.
Right.
Right.
I need other knowledge-based methods to solve it. But if we create a model, and this is one of the things I was thinking about, is that if we create a model for actually analyzing these types of programs, then that gives something to the future. Because
right. Yeah.
Government.
Yeah.
What do we do with pictures? How do we think?
Right.
Do we, give them all heroin, or do we actually think of them all?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, this is
great. Great. Can we get back to the presentation?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
Can reviewers?
Nice to see. Right there, themes from cross-disciplinary work. So you should be able to just be able to sort of. Yeah, great. Okay, so I recently did a series of interviews with some veteran researchers who had worked on aging-related technology projects. So we say gerontechnology. And these are some themes that emerged from those interviews. So these are not necessarily, they weren't necessarily working in a transdisciplinary manner, right? These projects go back 20 years, some of them. And so, working in different modes. But when you have these kind of cross-disciplinary projects with, again, different sectors working together, you kind of notice similar themes pop up. Okay? So the first one is navigating boundaries. Right? This is a really big issue because when you're working across sectors, you have the regular diversity of humanity amplified. Right? So we have different disciplines, different specialties, different sectors, right? People have different sets of experience and knowledge that they bring to the table as for the reason why they're there to help with this research or project. And also different nationalities, different languages, different careers, and every other demographic description of human being, right, that comes there. And these are things that you have to keep in mind if you want the project to go well, right? Cultural issues, right? With one project that was cross-European, there was a very clear difference in English proficiency between people from Northern Europe, which are languages that are more closely related to English, and Southern Europe, right, which are less closely related. So there's an understandable difference in proficiency, but this is something that you really need to keep in mind when working on a project, right? That might not be a problem that you encounter in every project, obviously, but it's these kind of issues that we need to keep in mind. So, what are the key points that we can keep in mind when trying to deal with this? Well, intersectionality theory is helpful, trying to understand how these different things can combine to affect power relations on a project and try to adjust for that. So, for example, language proficiency means that often that the people who are more proficient are going to get listened to more often. So you might have to go out of your way to ensure that people who are less proficient feel safe to talk about their concerns. And then also remembering how gender and career seniority and relations to the funding body, things like this can also overlap with that and make that more difficult to deal with. But it's just something to keep in mind. The next one is the importance of socialization and trust. There is a vast body of research talking about how important trust is in terms of productivity. Right? And this is especially true when you're doing something that is research or innovation-based, because you are really dependent upon feedback from your collaborators on how well things work and where the problems lie. And if people don't feel safe talking about their experience or their ideas, then you're going to miss out on a lot, right? And you might, there will be problems that people notice, but they weren't, they didn't want to talk about it because they thought they might get blamed for it, or that it was just something to do with, themselves, right? So, I mean, there's this need for trust, and socialization is a really important key for that. But socialization is something that we have to be very careful about because of cultural differences and expectations. So, one of the things that we've found worked in our projects is going to a restaurant rather than a pub, for example, because it's a similar kind of social gathering, and it gives people a chance to talk about both work-related and non-work-related issues. But it's a little bit safer in the sense that people are free to leave if they have to, and there's less alcohol involved. And then if people want to drink more, and I mean that can be a really important part of bonding, they can after, right? But it's nice to have these controlled, safe situations. Okay, so that's just one example. I think one other project used pizza parties, monthly pizza parties with their stakeholder groups, and it seems like a little thing, but it's massive, right, in terms of building trust and just getting people to feel like they are part of the project and that they understand what's going on. Okay. Another key point are the expectations of everyone involved, right? So if it's a transdisciplinary project, it's really important for people to realize how much work is going to be necessary in terms of communication and giving feedback. So if people are used to working on projects where they can kind of go off on their own and do their own thing, then it can be very they might not be ready, or they might not budget the time necessary. And then the amount of commitment. Let's see, this is kind of related, right? Are people committed to working in a transdisciplinary manner. The next theme was succeeding at things you're not very good at. And this is what I was referring to with the kind of intentionally unpredictable nature of research and innovation. Right? By definition, when you are doing research or innovation, you're doing something new, right? Something that hasn't been done before, that you don't have in decades of experience. You might have related experience that helps you do this more successfully, but by very definition of trying to do something new, it's something that you don't have direct experience dealing with. And this really challenges management and planning for projects, right? Estimating the feasibility and the timelines for a project can be very difficult when so much is uncertain. And so one very good warning that came out of the interviews was to avoid basic science if you're doing transdisciplinary work. Okay? So for example, there was in the example project, or the project that brought this up, they wanted to use voice recognition. And voice recognition is something that has, sort of worked for a long time, but even now, it doesn't work reliably, right? It's still an unsolved research area. And so having a very complicated transdisciplinary project depend upon something like that is asking for trouble. Okay, right? So you want the individual contributing parts to be fairly well understood before working in a collaborative manner. Another one is kind of estimating team member contribution, trying to figure out what people's motivations are and how much they'll be able to contribute to a project. This is not clear, it might change, particularly with researchers. Honestly, I think I heard a researcher explaining to an industry group once that he was flaky. That was the word he used, and I think that's, to a certain extent, that's true. Maybe it's a little bit harsh, but the idea is that it's hard to know if people will be able to dedicate 100% of their effort, or what percent of their effort, and that might change depending on career needs and personal family needs, right? And then it's not just researchers. Often people in industry and government are working on many different projects at the same time. It makes it difficult. If you're in the same organization, you might know more about the different projects that someone's working on, but if you're working across organizations, you won't. So the only thing, again, that I think helps with this is building up enough trust that you can communicate better. And the final point here is that this process requires constant learning. And again, this is kind of an investment time. Although one of the researchers I spoke to said that this was why they really liked working on this kind of research. That there were always new things to learn, and that made it really fast and rewarding. Okay, the third theme out of 4 is managing disparate teams. And by disparate, I'm referring to these two terms. Diverse, which I've already gone over with boundaries, but also distributed. Okay, so we have very different people and usually located in different places. And the second one, I say usually, but it's almost always with a transdisciplinary project. Even if it's in the same city, if you have different organizations working together, they're not going to, except in very rare circumstances, be located on the same campus. Okay? They're going to be in different buildings. And, it's quite often that it's not even in the same city, different parts of the same local region or different countries. It's very easy to, in our day and age, to be quite physically separate from the people you're collaborating with. And this is counter to an emphasis on physical proximity that is underlined in the software development literature. Alistair Coburn mentioned this, that when you have people who are working right beside each other, there's a lot of opportunity for informal exchanges of information, right? So the cliche is the water cooler, right? People are chatting around the water cooler, and a lot of that chatting is going to be non-work related, but you can have some extremely valuable exchanges where people reveal, for example, underlying assumptions that they might not mention in a formal meeting just because they would think it was obvious, but it might not be obvious. So this is a challenge. And then another thing is this idea of a lack of central management. When we have organizations, different organizations working together, it might not be clear who's the boss. Right? And that, to a certain extent, you know, a non-hierarchical interaction is valuable because it increases feedback and communication across the different groups that are involved, but it can make it difficult getting stuff done. And one thing that the people I interviewed mentioned was that you can see that these projects will become, you know, authoritarian at some point. It's kind of a natural thing, right? If there are challenges in progress. So, and particularly with large teams. And so this is something to kind of be proactive about. The collective impact, the idea of collective impact, this is something that comes out of community work. So for example, in the United States, it's been used to reduce pollution in rivers and increase high school graduation rates in local areas by bringing many different organizations in a given city together. And collective impact, one of the key aspects there, because it is a transdisciplinary kind of work, even though it might not involve researchers. One of the key aspects of a collective impact strategy is to have an external organization managing. Now, this might be a small organization that just ensures that all of the partners are, you know, fulfilling their obligations and are meeting regularly and communicating with each other, etc. But having some clear designated managers is very useful. Okay, and then the fourth key theme was encouraging adoption. And by adoption, I mean either adoption as policy, right, having the results of a project be adopted as policy, or commercialization, right, having your technology be adopted by the public or by, you know, funders as something that they want to use. And this is a really big challenge in transdisciplinary work. And I only have that one question on that side because it really isn't clear yet how to do this. Right? And this is one of the goals of the Age Well at Sea, is to support this and kind of develop new and better ways to encourage adoption of research results. You know, I mean, it's a shame, right? We have so much. If you look at the academic literature, there are these amazing things that are happening, but they're not. It's very difficult to realize them in the real world. Okay. So finally, I'm just going to talk about some things from my background in software development that are ideas of how to understand this and possible solutions. So I'm not. I just want to say that I'm not suggesting that this is something that, you know, that software development is better than any other field. That it's just that this is my perspective, and so this is what I hope to contribute to this discussion, at least up until this point. Okay, so some background from software development. Well, here let's start with this. The communication problem is this is a classic issue in software development, right? That you have a project, everybody wants it to succeed, but the views, the understanding of what the project entails is different. Right, so we have this swing, right, and the project sponsor, the project request, the senior analyst, the programmers, the installation, and what the user actually wanted are all really different. And if you like this graphic, there's a much bigger one. Different. Yeah, I mean, but it's one of these, you know, crying and laughing at the thing. This really happened. Okay, so one of that big way that software has learned to deal with this is agile methods. So software engineering traditionally used what was called a waterfall development method. Okay, so that's what's on the left there. Right? You have steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do 1 first, 2 next, etc. So you would do um, kind of brainstorming and then planning and then development, testing, and then deployment. Or whatever, right? But you would be able to do each step in order, and you wouldn't have to go back at all. And this was the dominant method of software engineering, I believe, up into the 70s and perhaps even in the 80s. Okay, but then it started to fall apart, and in the 90s, it was very common. It was that software projects would always be over budget, and so even though there was a lot of important software built in that time, it was not succeeding from a project management method. And that's where, with the agile methods movement, we get this shift from waterfall to iteration, so that you have multiple steps, but in a loop. Okay, so you do a little bit of research, a little bit of planning, a little bit of building, testing, and deployment, and then you get the feedback from that. So you're always learning from what you're doing. And so this is a really, this allows you to dynamically react to the challenges you face and the new ideas that come up as you're doing it. So a really famous example of this is Google, right? Gmail has been in beta since it's been released. They released it unfinished intentionally so that they could continually keep on building it as they got feedback. And testing from the user base. So again, feedback. This is the key thing. Right? Some other kind of aspects of agile methods that may or may not be appropriate are this idea of lightweight methods versus heavyweight methods. So lightweight methods are ones that are not very formal, don't need a lot of documentation, things you can just do, whereas heavyweight methods have to be planned and documented, and you have to be careful about them. They're both useful, but it depends really on the team size. Smaller teams don't need as much management, and the criticality of the project. So by criticality, I mean what are the risks, right? Are you dealing with critical risks if you fail, right? So if you're making a video game, it's minimally critical, right? If the game breaks, nothing really bad happens usually. But if you're dealing with, for example, chemotherapy, equipment software, hardware controllers, then if it breaks, then people can get hurt, right? So you would want to use more heavyweight methods when there's a higher criticality. Okay? So I think that there are some parallels between that and transdisciplinary projects, right? Trying to understand how, what are the risks of the successes or failures of the project. And also, the other final thing in agile methods that's useful is this focus on human factors, right? That it's human beings working on the project. So you want to, number one, respect the limits of their capability to work, right? You don't want to overwork them, and also you want to get them working together so that they can identify each other's mistakes and mentor each other and learn from each other. Okay, a kind of a general idea coming out of this, and a lot of the other stuff I've talked about today, is this emphasis on communication. And I think it's useful to think of communication styles, right? We have high bandwidth and low bandwidth styles of communication. So high bandwidth is, for example, something like face-to-face interaction, right? Where you're getting a lot of information. Like in addition to the words that are being spoken, you can hear the person's tone of voice. You can hear you can see their body language. You're getting multiple types of information, right? Not only words, but maybe also diagrams, etc. There's a lot going on. And low bandwidth communication is like email, for example, or a written document, where it's just a very specific mode communication. Okay. Both of these are really useful, right? High bandwidth communication is useful when you need to encourage creativity and trust, and when you're trying to communicate very complicated topics or ideas, right? Where you're giving someone multiple ways to try to understand something. Low bandwidth communication is very useful in the sense that it's easy to transmit, right, either through the internet or across time in terms of having written documents, for example. It's also transferable in the sense that it can be easier to transfer the idea to other venues, whereas the high bandwidth explanation might be very kind of problem or instance specific. Low bandwidth because often you're generalizing or paring down the ideas. It might be easier to generalize. Okay? So there are pluses and minuses. Like there's really, it's more that there are strengths in each type of communication. So you want to use both. Social networking has a lot of potential, I think, for kind of bridging the two, but there really isn't any ultimate research social network yet, or transdisciplinary collaboration social network, one that allows people to search and share work safely and securely, but also in a kind of a fun multimedia way that allows for kind of social interaction, like thumbs up, stuff like that. That really kind of makes it a more natural way of working together online. And then just to kind of wrap up from the software development ideas is try to explain things efficiently. So visualizing ideas and visualizing data. These are well-known ways of kind of cross-sector and cross-disciplinary communication. Formalization can be very useful. So you communicate by defining something in a formal manner. So these are things like UML or abstract state machines that software developers often use to develop an idea of what to build in software, but they're abstract enough and they're simple enough that you don't need to be a programmer to understand. All of the kind of technical details are not included. Okay, and I have an example of that on the next slide. And another thing just to keep in mind is vocabulary comparison. Make sure that that you're using the same words and that your meaning of the words when you're working in a cross-disciplinary environment are understood. Okay, so critical is a good example, right? I just used critical to talk about the safeness of a project, but when I was talking about criticality, but critical can be, can mean very different things, right? If you think about critical theory or critical research in the humanities, for example, it's quite a different. Okay, so here's an example of formal methods. So this is a little diagram of how criminal target acquisition takes place. It's a really simple one about talking about how a potential criminal might identify a crime. And when it's put down like this, it can be accessible for people who are not technical experts or programming experts, but at the same time, this can be transformed into a program in a very straightforward manner. This is kind of an example of how you can use formal design to communicate. Okay. So we've been doing some model comparison, trying to compare models across different methods for one project. And I'm not going to talk about that a lot, but just I want to mention that this is kind of one way of trying to understand the underlying assumptions of the different disciplines that are contributing to a project and to identify those vocabulary issues, right? Equivalent words and conflicting words. So that's everything I have to say today. I kind of did through it, so I apologize if it was too much information in a short period of time. But thank you very much for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions or feedback.
Cool. So there's a feedback thing, so we'll
Okay.
type in their questions.
Can we maybe switch to the camera?
Yep.
And then take off.
Actually, I can't. I was trying to add them into the call, so it's doing the call, but so it's
not helping? Oh, no. Yeah. And then we can, there's probably the chat. Can you guys use the chat? Oh, Okay.
But we can
Okay. Did you have anything, Hillary?
No, just that so much of this is so pertinent right now in my work.
Okay.
You know, where the stage I'm at, and it actually makes me feel good to know that some of the methods of communication I've been using,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with individuals with good intentions but no specialized knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
are suggested here, like
Okay.
diagramming out the process
Yeah.
so people understand how it actually does occur.
Mm-hmm.
Ensuring that we operationally define the language we're going to use and agree on the opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so huge because even when we're speaking the same language, we're not speaking the same language.
Right. Right.
Right? So yeah, so a lot of this does seem to me where we're going. You know, I think you're so right that the problems are so complex, and it's so critical now. If we fail, there's so little money to solve problems. You know, unless it's that
Right.
very commercialized thing.
Right.
If we're looking at social problems.
Right.
If you know, every dollar for social problems is fought over as though it's the last dollar on earth.
Right.
And so, you know, ensuring that you're not wasting it as you go along, you know, that you can show there is value. We're going to get somewhere with this. We're not going to spin our wheels, because I've been in projects where we did spin our wheels.
Right. Right.
You know, to get to the end of that, because nobody did take over, or
right. Right.
or we just could never agree on what we were talking about. You know. So this was really good for me. It really solidified a lot of things I've been thinking about lately. I just think that we have to somehow really get this out to all advanced education. I don't think all faculties are there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yet the problems are so complex and multidimensional that we're not going to solve the problem.
Right.
Criminology is not going to solve the problem.
Yes.
You know, not it's so tightly linked to addictions and mental illness and policy and prejudice and you know.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. That's something that's become more and more clear, right? That it's not an isolated problem that can be just solved, right?
Precisely. And I think for me it's probably, as much as the millennials frustrate me in a classroom setting, I think the fact that they have this ability to multitask and to flip from perspective to perspective is actually going to be, as well as no fear of authority to say, I think what you're doing is stupid wrong. Right? Because there's no respect for that authority. And I actually think it's going to be to the benefit as we go through this type of research. I really do. Because they don't respect the old ways of doing things.
Right.
And nor should they, because they're not working.
Right.
Right? But there's so much of that deference to authority and to reputation, especially in academia.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
the review process, right?
Sure.
Problem we have with that. And I think that as the millennial generation really gets on their feet as graduate students and established researchers, those qualities are going to be very valuable. And I know they're not valuable in an undergrad class. They're highly disruptive, but I really think that and this type of research is eminently suited to that. And it's a slightly different way of thinking millennial.
Yeah, no, I mean it is really interesting. I mean I think that I mean from my experience, it kind of makes me think of the you know, if we have different multi-generational people working together, that there's going to be some friction over that. But
you bet.
But maybe in a productive way, right?
Well, and this is where one of my projects went just into the carburetor, was that inability for the senior individuals to accept the criticism of their work because they were so used to being deferred to. And yet the inability of the younger ones to remain silent when they
Right.
knew it wasn't working.
Right.
It wasn't functioning, right?
Right, right, right.
And so it became a problem of personality
Right.
rather than the problem that we were trying to solve.
Huh.
And it had devastating consequences. Actually, it was in a social service agency,
Right.
and it had devastating problems
Right.
or outcomes,
Yeah, yeah.
and resulting in the board dissolving, all kinds of bad stuff.
Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah, so I went in at the end.
But that's a good point, right? That this, you know, the in terms of expectations and commitment to the project, right, rather than to you know things that are external to that collaboration, right, like your own career expectations and advancement and stuff like that are not.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
Like, are you established and have everything in place, or are you working to be established?
Right.
And you know, just because my generation worked 80 hours a week and didn't see their kids doesn't mean the new generation is willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They want to go snowboarding with their kids on Saturday.
Right.
They're going to leave the project and
Right.
go snowboarding.
Right.
You know, and so we ran in this project, we ran into resentment on the part of the older individuals not understanding why the younger ones wouldn't give their weekend because they had nothing.
Right.
So there was, and it, like I said, everyone was speaking the same language, but they were not culturally in the same place at all. So I don't know if there's other questions, but so I think that if we can solve the problems of this type of research, I think we'll start to solve the problems of the world.
Well, I mean, I hope, you know, the reason why I bring up the agile methods example is because software engineering went from something that had massive problems as an industry to being, you know, this powerhouse nowadays, right? Of you know, economically and in terms of just changing the way people do things, right? And so I hope that you know, it's not going to be the exact same, you know, recipe, right? But that works. But you know, I'm hoping that we do start to see that same change in terms of productivity and, you know, less frustration and more adoption of the things that we understand. Yeah.
And I think software engineering is a perfect example because in my mind, we're not going to solve our problems by moving, you know, I don't know, 1/800th of a degree to the right or the left, which is the way traditional science has been done.
Right.
Do exactly what was done before, but change one thing.
Right.
Software engineering didn't do that.
Right.
It took people saying, we're going down a whole new road.
Right.
And startups to do that, right? To
Take
say,
big
I
risks.
reject the model, and I'm willing to risk starting up and
right. Trying
and so when we, at least in my experience, when it's been huge advances in science, it's been when we've made those leaps out of, you know, going down the road we were going down and saying, we've taken this as far as it's going to go. We've got to come at it from a new angle now.
Right.
And it's being willing to have, you know, some 12-year-old tell you that.
Right.
When you just spent 40 years of your life going down that road, which is, it's not to say it's not respected, it is respected, just that understanding you have to choose a new road.
Right.
Time to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I'm personally happy. Like for me.
Just do you think that maybe were there other questions that the current ones, like if we select one of those?
Nope. If there's new ones, they would show up on
Okay, great.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, I hope you guys off in electronic land, Sarah and Jen, I hope that was useful for you and for anyone who watches this afterwards, because it'll be available on our website. And so thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Hillary, and Byron. Thank you very much. Okay.